Dear friends, welcome to E-Pathshala. I am Dr. Vishal Jadhav, Department of Sociology, Tilak Maharashtra Vidyapeeth, Pune. Today we are going to assess a module titled Yuval-Davis on Gender and Citizenship, which is part of the paper on political sociology. Until now we have seen what the idea of nation is, what nationalism meant, and we have also seen a critique of T.H. Marshall's thesis, in which the assumption that nation is a homogeneous entity is contested. This particular module will try and assess what are the views of Yuval-Davis on gender and how it crisscrosses the notion and the idea of a nation. Gender and nation are to be discussed in terms of power relations in this particular module. Nationalism and shared blood ties. The identity of a nation is constructed very often on the basis of one blood or shared genes. In such an imagination, a nation is constructed on the basis of common genealogical origin of the people, say for example in terms of a specific race. While ties of blood bind people as one nation, separating them from others, the question of maintaining purity of that blood or race assumes utmost importance. In such imaginations of a nation, threat of mixture of different bloods and fear of contamination of purity of race through intermarriages and sexual relations between people of different collectivities may serve as assaults on the essence of nation itself. Therefore, there is an overwhelming drive to control the quality of genes or race that make up a nation, and also to ensure its reproduction in the purest form. The racist element in such a nationalist discourse is very evident, which defines nation in terms of a pure race facing threats of a contamination from outsiders. Women are biological reproducers of the race that constitutes the nation in such an undertaking. A preoccupation with questions of purity of racial core of the nation necessitates that the women's reproductive power must also be controlled and channeled in desired manner. In this context, a newborn cannot be considered a part of the national collectivity just by being born into it. The membership of each of the parents becomes a deciding factor. For example, by Islamic laws, it is the father's membership that is taken into cognizance, while in others like Judaism, it's the mother's national identity that decides. In cases of mixed parenthood, the membership of the newborn is regulated by a host of customary religious and legal laws and conventions that define a quintessential nation and its membership. Often such children are denied membership, are accorded a secondary or inferior status within the nation. Women's reproductive health and rights in a nationalist discourse. A woman's role as a biological reproducer of the nation implies that mechanisms of control over a body, reproductive rights and health are plenty. For example, at any given historical time, the dominant power structures may force women to produce more children or less, as also children of a particular sex with the help of prenatal sex determination technology. A woman's reproductive powers are controlled to increase or decrease the size of the population as desired, and also to control the quality of reproduction by use of genetic technology. The desire for a particular size and quality of population can be a result of a variety of reasons. Producing a national stock that is pure in racial terms, of a particular size or quality that is representative of power and hence superiority of the nation over other national collectivities. All these aspects factor into the ideological reconstruction of a nation. For example, there are several nationalist purposes for which more number of people are required. Therefore, women are called upon to produce more offsprings, like for military services or as workers. Similarly, the discourse of eugenics that seeks to modify the quality of the population through genetic engineering so as to predetermine the quality of the nation is a gendered discourse. Its concern with the reproductive health of women arise out of the need to preserve a superior quality of the nation so that undesirable traits can be filtered out with the help of selective breeding. For example, the reproductive capacities of poor, uneducated women is monitored and even prohibited, lest it has a bearing upon the quality of the nation. In India, the population control policies of the government singularly targets the poorer sections, blaming them for population explosion, which supposedly brings down the development graph of the nation. The population policies of a nation have a direct bearing upon the reproductive health of women and are therefore highly gendered. Systematic drives by a nation to control growth rate of population are often driven by Malthusian prophecy of scarcity of global food resources, which are no match to the explosive rate of population growth. On the other hand, an unregulated population growth poses a threat to stability of the economic system by an oversupply of labor power. The social context in which a woman is placed has a bearing upon her reproductive health and rights. The control over women's fertility is often aided by cultural and social factors. The moral code sanctioned by dominant religions seeks to regulate women's fertility, and in such contexts, crucial rights like right to abortion, right to contraceptives, etc. are not accessible to women. Women's control over her body and sexuality are seen as a threat to conservative power structures, and therefore there exists tight grip over a women's reproductive options. In poorer nations, where more economic value is placed on the male child, female infanticide is widely practiced. In the age of social and economic globalization, several of these processes have been accelerated. Massive cut down in public welfare expenditure, along with structural readjustment programs, especially in poorer nations, result in spiraling impacts. Recent upsurge in reactionary fundamentalist politics in different parts of the world has resulted in mushrooming of several conservative governments and political movements that strive to impose more control over women's life and body in the name of culture and traditions. The phenomena of women going out to work in order to make a living is seen as a threat in terms of a reversal that is affected in traditional roles of a man and a woman. Therefore, any kind of fundamentalist politics glorifies the traditional role of a woman inside a household, and high social values accorded to women's reproductive identity. Cultural reproduction of a nation. The meta-narrative of a nation rests on reproduction of a cultural identity. It is very often that a nation is projected to be constituted by a singular cultural essence. The category of culture is a contested concept. At a given historical time, the realm of culture may contain contradictory claims concerning its essential components. The claims of hegemonic powers within the nation are affirmed as well as contested by culture-based politics. Boundaries of a nation are made and unmade on the basis of cultural identity. Categories of exclusion and inclusion within a nation are defined in cultural terms. Women as embodiment of honor. Needless to say, the process of cultural construction of a nation and generation of an adherent set of social identities is a gendered process. Cultural reproduction of a national identity employs gender relations in varieties of contexts. The element of authenticity inherent in the cultural identity of the nation is tested by its safe passage from generation to generation, the primary responsibility of which rests on women. Women as a repository of cultural values is exemplified by her assumed role as the carrier of such values as she gives birth to the next generation. Religious customs, traditions, familial values, particular ways of living and similar cultural values are passed on to the future generations and thus preserved. In a sense, women as the assumed representatives of culture are accorded the burden of its preservation as well as continuation. Being safeguards of cultural identity also implies that women are construed as symbolic bearers of community's honor, including that of a nation. The women embody the nation's collective identity as well as honor. Women are tortured and killed when they transgress the set moral code because it brings shame and dishonor to the community. Therefore, in a number of ways, control and exploitation of women are accorded moral justification on the pretext of preserving honor of the nation or community. As bearers of collective honor and pride, specific roles are expected of women. Women are assigned the role of keeping this honor safe and pure. Political use of rape and sexual violence against women in case of caste-based conflicts or violent pogroms against religious minorities is everyday news. Construction of womanhood as embodying the nation's honor, especially in cultural imaginings, includes process to keep this honor intact and secure. Such objectification of women effectively means that her body and life are subjected to constant surveillance and scrutiny. This also implies that the right of a woman to participate in national life with the voice of her own is effectively curtailed. The identity of the other as a potential threat of the nation is often perceived in quite sexualized and racial terms. Nation and the other, politics of exclusion and inclusion. Deployment of gendered categories to construct the identity of a nation and its consequent distinctness from other rival collectivities is depicted in the image of the perceived others. As said earlier, the image of the other as perceived threat to the nation is understood in sexualized and racial terms. For the European colonial rulers, their exotized image of mysterious cultures of the East fed on the images of the colonized as the other, with unknown mythical powers that was to be feared. Yet the innate primitiveness, ignorance, and inferior status of the colonized race were also part of the same essentialized image of the other. With seemingly untamed physical and sexual prowess, the image of the other as a probable rapist or a sexual predator, or one with mythical sexual liaisons with women of hegemonic collectivity, are some dominant perceptions that go into the making of identity of the other. Politics of suppression and silencing all opposition is accorded moral legitimacy on the pretext of saving integrity of the nation. The internalization of the image of the other on the part of the other also has historical precedents. The social reformers in colonial India struggled to reform Indian society from within to escape emasculization at the hands of the colonial rulers. The manner in which Indians treated their own women and were chained by their own regressive social customs and traditions was indicative of only one thing: disempowerment. An effeminate colony like India could only prove its worth only by pursuing the most masculine project of a fast-paced industrial development. Sexualized and racialized image of the other has a pivotal role to play in contemporary global political economy. The ever-expanding economies of sex tourism, pornography, as well as human trafficking employ the exoticized and eroticized image of the other to boost business. Sexual fantasies, which otherwise are considered improper for women of one's community due to issue of honor, are consumed without hesitation when performed by women from foreign lands who crowd porn industries in several countries. Sex tourism as a site of accumulation of most marginalized of labor in countries like Thailand, Philippines, and South Korea is developed as a recreation on the basis of same sexualized image of the other. The cultural construct of the image of women as personifying a nation's honor and that of the other as a probable threat to that honor correspond to this dichotomy between us and them. This essential dichotomy between us and them sets the boundaries of each and specifies limits of any kind of social interaction. A constructed sense of constant threat from the other provides legitimacy to nation states to arm and militarize themselves, including attempts to go nuclear. The relationship with the other is one that is mediated by violence and lack of social responsibility. However, each of these images is essential to reinforce the other, and together they feed into a discourse of nationalism at any given historical time. Citizenship and nationalism. The category of citizen fetches in another set of qualifications that define belongingness to a nation. Being part of the national collective means that a certain set of duties and role fulfillment are expected from men and women who belong to that nation. The criteria of citizenship is again a historically contested terrain. All those within the boundaries of a nation are not its citizen. Process of otherization are constant within boundaries of a nation so that hegemonic power relations are mentioned at all, opposition is effectively neutralized. The identity of a citizen is therefore more marked by a set of strains, while on one hand there is constant struggle to make it more inclusive by accommodating differences. On the other hand, the ideological construct of a citizen with an allied set of rights and duties is used as a mode of othering itself. For example, service in the military or army of the nation has been historically constructed as the civic duty of the citizen, While participation in the military is not compulsory for a citizen in most countries, yet it is indicative of a position of an enhanced civil status. The coercive authority of the state depends upon its army. Consequently, challenges to the hegemonic power of the state may find their origin in the same. Therefore, it is essentially binding upon the nation state to encourage its citizens to actively participate in army in service of the nation. The ideological identity of a citizen with the highest aim of protecting one's nation is pressed into service, and this also accords legitimacy to the ideological construct of a nation. Armies and wars interspersing of class, gender, and nationalism. The nation state is swayed by a variety of historical reasons to recruit its citizens in the army the particular way that it does. Recruitment in an army is defined by intersections of class, ethnicity, and gender. Call for participation in the army is more binding for certain ethnic religious minorities in order to prove their loyalty to the nation. Stereotypical and racialized images of certain communities as fierce and dangerous may induce their recruitment within the army as a special regiment or corps. There have been historical examples where certain communities have been encouraged, even coerced, to volunteer for the army more than any other groupings. The inferior position of these very communities within the hegemonic collective of a nation is reflected in the fact that they are employed as cannon fodder within the militaries, and these are the groups which face maximum casualty in an event of war or any other national project. The recruitment process within the armies all across the world are visibly gendered processes. Women's participation in the armies is of specific nature. Duty in a very specific sense is expected of women. Within the armies, women are recruited primarily as nurses, teachers, and civil personnel, which reinforces the gender stereotype that women, being physically inferior to men, are not meant to kill and fight in wars. As a citizen of the nation, of women is expected to play the role of a supporter, a wife, a mother who keeps the home running while the husband goes to fight war. The stereotypical image of a woman as a weak, docile being, apt for lighter chores of household, in need of constant protection is utilized to bring out or enhance the machoism of men in the armies. The construct of the feminine is constantly invoked to press differences between female soldiers and their male counterparts, and this serves twin purposes. On one hand, the raw masculine power of the male soldiers is honed against the impotent feminine, while women are recruited in armies to keep a check on any possible attack on traditional power structures at home. Armies are not the only medium which shapes up women's experiences in situations of conflicts and wars. The effects of displacement and destruction caused by wars are very different for women as compared to men. Traditional structures of power which forbid women from joining armies result in women being left at home with children and the elderly when the male members are mobilized to join armies and fight wars for the nation. In such situation, women are left to fend for themselves and rest of a family. The biggest casualties in war are probably the men who fight in armies. In cases of military invasions, it is the men who are rounded up, tortured, killed, and made to disappear. However, the after effects of the war are borne acutely by women and children who are left behind. Refugees all over the world consist of more and more women and children. Added to this is the fact that in face of military aggression, women are exposed to systematic rape at the hands of the invading army. The women are at the receiving end of violence of rape as a mode of torture, or that perpetrated with the intent of violating the honor of the community. Women who are rape victims in situations of war face the threat of abandonment by the surviving families and communities because of the preoccupation with the questions of honor and shame. Children born to rape victims are often not owned up by the families because of the same reason. The violence of displacement and forced migrations that wars and military aggressions cause is made conspicuous by its gendered effect. The burden of reconstructing or starting life afresh in new place and altered circumstances rests with the women more than anyone else. The gender dimension of impacts of war is also class mediated. The identity of a refugee in a war-torn country has become a permanent identity of its people, especially the women. Third world nationalisms implications for the feminist movement. The preceding pages give an account of the different ways in which gender identities are employed to give shape to a particular discourse of nationalism. A host of social identities created by such discourse lend credence to ideological construct of a nation. The status and role of a woman in society is determined by a host of social, political, and economic factors that go into cultural construction of a nation. The identity of a woman, including the question of a right over self and body, are socially mediated as well as socially determined. The privileged identity of women as the biological reproducer of the nation has consequences in terms of a rigid control over something as basic as a reproductive right. The historical preservation and reproduction of a nation's identity and honor are assumed to be the responsibility of women folk. This, incidentally, is also the historical framework that defines the citizenship status of women, which invokes an entirely different set of roles, duties, and rights of women as compared to men. In contexts like these, the primary struggle for any feminist or women's movement is for an autonomous space and identity against the hegemonic discourse of a nation. The feminist movement channels its fight to attain equal individual rights, which otherwise stand displaced in the name of community, nation, and state. The question is whether the dominant stream within feminist movement, especially in that of the Western countries, be generalized for women who are part of oppressed nationalities as well. Our experiences and concerns of women in post-colonial societies reeling under neo-colonial relations of suppression and domination in rapidly globalizing world the same as those of the so-called first world feminists. The subjugated nationalities in contemporary times, in which women along with their male counterparts face the brunt of new forms of oppression, their stance towards issues of nationalism are very different from the conventional opposition that is perceived to exist between the discourse of feminism and nationalism. Feminists from the so-called third world accuse their Western counterparts of looking at the specific problems and experiences in solely cultural terms. The overwhelming context of a white liberal democracy in which feminism of the West is located serves only to essentialize the identity of women in the third world. The socio-economic and political context of a woman located in the third world is very different from a counterpart in the advanced West. Therefore, the responses of the former category of women to question of liberation, rights, and autonomy will be of different nature that contained in the discourse of Western feminist movements. To conclude, therefore, we have seen Yuval-Davis's argument on why women are always at the margins of citizenship claims. Gender is a very important category while understanding inclusions and exclusions, especially so in a highly patriarchal society. The whole question of honor and nation, the whole question of reproductive rights of women, even the whole question of power over their own bodies is discussed in this particular module. Therefore, rights of citizens and rights of women as citizens are two completely different things that we have seen in this particular module. Thank you.